Coming up with all the speculation around the Brooklyn Nets, is it Dame time in Brooklyn? We discuss the possibility of adding Dame Lillard to the Brooklyn Nets, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norry, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and the playoff New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms, and let you know, download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And Doug, it was a guarantee that we would talk about the speculation that Dame Lillard could be on the market for the Brooklyn Nets this offseason.
Yeah, look, he shows up at game 3. He's sitting in the crowd. That's immediately going to get everyone speculating. Now, he might have been there to see the guys in Philly, so who knows? And there's obviously increasing talk that this might be the end of the line for the Blazers and Dame if they're going to look to sort of move forward without him, and just like he is not going to set their timeline, and they're going to reset things. And he's been, great for them, but it might be time to move on. So obviously the Nets, who just jettisoned 2 superstars, are going to be part of the conversation around, or possibly part of the conversation around Dame. And Marks, as we'll get into some quotes, didn't shut it down immediately. He didn't confirm that that's what they were going to be doing, but he conveniently didn't shut anything down either. So we can get into it, but it's an interesting state of affairs here, because as with the NBA, as we know, is like every team is sort of just like one unhappy superstar away from either things looking up or things looking down for your franchise in the long term. And Dame, on that standpoint, qualifies at least a superstar.
Yeah, and I think, we had talked about this over every single time something came up with Kevin Durant over the last couple of years, trade request, maybe not necessarily thinking you're going to be able to go forward long-term with Kyrie Irving. And we said the back end of this, when you make the trades and you get back a lot of draft capital, you're only waiting for a max extension to get signed by a player, but also know that he's not going to be a part of that long-term future. Happened with Anthony Davis, obviously ultimately ending up in LA with the Lakers, right? So these things can happen. And you mentioned, multiple sources saying it, no one denying it. Dame Lillard also came out and mentioned Mikal Bridges by name as being like one of his favorite players in the NBA currently. At a very, very, very high level, are you pro Dame Lillard being on this team? Like, are you pro Dame Lillard at this point of his career? Because I think that's a kind of a fascinating question to ask when we think about the way we often discuss backcourt players versus what the NBA is predicated on in terms of deep championship level playoff runs.
It's a lot. It's like, it's a layered question, right? And like, we'll get into Marx's responses and just sort of like the Nets, draft capital and all this other stuff, or like assets or lack thereof. But just on a high level, yeah. I mean, with Lillard, I think that I'll always qualify responses to this, be like, it depends on the price, right?
Sure.
Like, so, and so that's always part of it to me. It's not as easy for me to just say, I know people want to be like, yes or no. It's like, well, it's just not a yes or no. Like, this is a spectrum here of outcomes. And, if you gave up Mikal Bridges and if you get Mikal Bridges and every pick you ever had for the rest of your franchise for Dame Lillard, no, like if you gave up just Ben Simmons' contract, which would never happen for Dame Lillard, sure. Right. But like, and then between those two things is a whole list of other possibilities. Is Dame a great player? Yes. If you put Dame on this team specifically this year and every other piece was the same, could they have beaten Philly? Yeah, I think they could have, right? Like, I think the way that could they won the championship? No, right? Like, but in terms of just adding Lillard, to me, it's the spectrum is wide here, but I'm not denying his talent. He's amazing. There are other contextual things with him that bring up different questions, but I can understand why a fan base, at least, or a certain segment of the fan base, would be really excited about the prospect, because Lillard's like one of the best guards that we've seen in basketball. He's great.
At the highest possible level, it's exactly what you just said there at the end, right? He's one of the best. Like, he's one of the best in the game. And we talked about this around, ironically enough, like Kevin Durant moves you could make, and the idea of, well, you jettison Kyrie and Ben Simmons, and you end up going and trying to get a Dame Lillard because of his attitude, like because of his approach to basketball. It very much seems like he's an all-in basketball player. All he cares about is wanting to win. There's a very much a sense of loyalty that he's shown to Portland over the years. He's never been a guy that said, sorry. And you can make the very strong case that Portland has done time and time again several things that would lead Dame to say, you guys don't have this. You cannot figure this out the right way. So from that standpoint, I would love to have him. I think you hit the nail on the head with, what's the cost? What's the price point? Can the Nets manage to do it? And if they do it, what is the position they're in going forward, right? Because we just come out of this iteration with superstars on this team. And if you're concerned about 3-4 years from now, what will be the state of this roster? Going and trading for Dame Lillard, we'll get into this later in the show, like it's going to impact what you look like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. And that's what I found fascinating about Sean Marks' response and the idea that this organization, who just came out of a very unsuccessful superstar era, might be willing to go right back in to a superstar era.
Yeah, look, Marks spoke to the media at length on over the weekend following the loss, and this part of it's reported by Brian Lewis over at the New York Post. Does a great job covering the Nets. To summarize part of Marks's thoughts when it was asked about just trades in general, Lillard is not mentioned by name here by Marks, but he said, "This is Marks." He said, "It'd be way too soon to call us a contender." I mean, no kidding. My words here, no kidding. We need to let the dust settle a bit. We've always been prepared in this day and age. We've all seen players demand trades, teams change, ownerships, front offices, they all pivot. You need to be ready. And then he later on said, he said we have to take a moment to reflect and say, do we have the right process in place? Were we ready? Was the team ready? Was the surrounding what they brought with Kevin and Kai in that group, or was it ready along those lines? And finally he says, regarding whether or not they're going to like sort of make a big splash, he says it's a great question, something we thought a lot about. We'll continue to think about as we go. The key here is that like there's no clear no, we're not doing that in here. Yep. Right. And referencing some of the stuff that's happened in the past, obviously you have to make mention of it. It did not go very well, but also being sort of at least open from a front facing standpoint to the idea of maybe doing it again. Look, these guys are never going to tip their hand. The Nets play it really close to the vest just in general. But I would take from this quote to mean at least like, hey, we are open to it and it's not just lip service, right? Yep. Like we're not just keeping our door open here. I think or keeping all options open. I think it's probably like I do think it's probably a real conversation they're having, even if the pieces aren't all in place for them. But like, I think that this is how they've signaled many times, this is how they want to operate. Like they don't want to operate the other way. We were years and years.
We want to be a competitive team. We want to be an attractive team for potentially superstars, and we want to be in a position to go get one if we think the right opportunity presents itself. I agree with you on that front. And coming up here in a second, the next question, obviously, in this chain of command is: do the Brooklyn Nets have enough to go get a Dame Lillard from Portland? We'll break down the possibilities and the capital in the cupboard coming up next.
Before we get to that, I can tell you about our friends over at Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. Look, you think you're a Sean Marks type, or you think you could do it better than Sean Marks? I know there's a lot of people out there that think they can run a basketball organization, be the GM of their own team. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is going to give you the chance. If you thought you were a great NBA GM, good news. You can try it out and figure out maybe it's not as easy as you thought. With Ultimate GM, you're going to do every piece of the managing the team. You're going to deal with challenging personalities, players, and coaches. Hire the right coaches and assistants. You're going to trade and train players. You're going to make draft picks. You're going to navigate your franchise through free agency and the draft, all the ups and downs of multiple seasons. Maybe you'll package all your assets together and grab the game's version of Damian Lillard. It's all on there for Ultimate GM. You can go and download Ultimate GM right now. Locked On listeners are going to get 100% free boost to their franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in the game store. Make sure to check it out. To download the game, go to probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up in the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. And when you're done with that, go check out our friends over at Abada Groceries, school shopping, getting a little something for yourself. You know you're already doing it, so why not get a little cash back for it with Abada? You can watch your closet grow after purchasing all the season's latest trends. How about also watching your cash back grow with each purchase with Abada? You can earn cash back on everything, on every shopping trip. It gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. I'll either link to your loyalty account in Abada or upload your receipt after you shop, and you're going to get your cash back. It's that easy. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Abada. Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Abada is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Abada by using the code LOCKED when you register. Go to the App Store or Google Play and download the free Abada app and use the promo code LOCKED. That's Abada, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store. Use the promo code LOCKED to get cash back today.
And don't forget, my friends, coming up in the rest of this week, Doug Norry is going to break down some key statistics that led to the sweep at the hands of the Philadelphia 76ers and overarching things from this season that can inform how this offseason unfolds for Brooklyn, and maybe it'll also inform how they approach potentially a trade for one Dame Lillard. I'm going to keep things simple here, Doug, because I don't need to complicate it. I take Ben Simmons and 4 first-round picks for Dame Lillard. It's a done deal. Gosh, that was easy. And I probably do the 2023 first-round picks, obviously, because we're going to be highly competitive next season if we get Dame. What else do we really need to do? You want me to throw in a Cam Thomas? I throw in a Cam Thomas. You tell me. But the money works and the capital is there. Do you think, can it be that easy for any team? Let's not just say the Nets, but can it be that easy that, 3-4 first-round picks and maybe some young assets is going to be enough for a player like Dame, $60 million on the books, who's a veteran, and there's an organization in Portland that's going to go a different direction?
I think okay, so here's the thing. I think if Lillard hits the open market hits the trade market, and because they made their intentions really clear that they want to move on from him, I do think the list of suitors here will be pretty long. Without having dove into each team's availability or viability of getting him, I think there's going to be more than one suitor. Now, where I do find this to be interesting is, sort of like where trade markets around guys like this are going to be, because they got totally screwed up around the Gobert trade from last year, right? So it's like hard to know if there's going to be sort of a hard reset, let's say, on what trade value really is. Okay. But Lillard, we know, is not Gobert and is like much better, and he impacts your winning on a core level, much sooner and more viably than Gobert. Now, do the Nets have, all this to say, I think there will be a lot of teams in the market here. The Nets trade package is going to look worse than a lot of teams. Like that's very clear. There's too many things. There are a lot of things working against them right now. One, they don't have great, even like middle money to put onto something. The way you start matching the assets is a guy like Simmons, who's like a negative asset at this point. So you'd almost have to attach like more, to attach more just to get Simmons' contract over there. And
that's the biggest first question, is like, because we saw this reported when these discussions were going on. Is Ben Simmons' money alone and the idea that he could be something again at some point, is that marginally enough, or does it take adding, you have to say, and a first round pick, right? Because if it's that, by the way, because I will push back just on your idea, like, do the Nets have the idea of having enough? Like, you can look right now, because if we're going to talk about the Phoenix and the Dallas trades and then look at those organizations and say, well, by 2029, those first round picks could be very attractive based on what happens specifically with Phoenix and getting older. They're going to have to rule, certainly. Dallas, we don't know. It doesn't look like Luka's going anywhere, but where are they going to be? So, like, you do have 3 first round picks. You go back to 2027, and those first round picks, there is far enough capital that you could send out to a team and say, you could be talking about 2 or 3 of these 6 first round picks having lottery at least potential, and not every competitive team is going to be able to say that.
Okay, that's fair enough. Maybe I'm understating a little bit, like what their draft capital they can send back is. Yeah. I do, but my original point I think stands, is that like Simmons, you're not just sending the money here. Like this is not just a money swap. Like to send Simmons, like I'm making these numbers up, but like you'll get the gestalt of what I mean here. Let's say it was going to be 6 first round picks for Dame, right, or something like that. if you were sending Simmons' contract, I think you'd have to like attach another first round pick onto it just to get Simmons' contract out of here. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like I think he's that kind of asset at this point, or negative asset. Like, so I don't like putting him in the trade is not helpful, except that it helps the money work. Beyond that, it's not helpful.
The dollars,
which is important. You got to match the money.
Motivation of a team.
Yeah, matching the money's tough. Like, that's hard. Dame makes a lot, and he's set to make a ton going forward. But like for purposes here, matching the money or 75% of the outgoing salary, like Simmons helps there. But after that, like you'd have to attach more to get Simmons' contract into it, because like who wants this guy? And that's another problem.
So before we talk about like, should the Nets do or not do something like this, right? Based on their timeline and the team that they're going to have in place. I think the other factor here to tie into yesterday's episode, go listen to it. It's a juicy one. Dorian Finney-Smith, Royce ONeill, you want to add Spencer Dinwiddie maybe into that category. You know, there's a handful of players, and then the young talent. Whatever you assess them in terms of draft value. Yesterday we talked about Dorian Finney-Smith could have been 2 first rounds. Maybe it's only 1. Maybe Royce ONeill is borderline a 1, right? Cam Thomas, what is his value? The other way that I think you look at this potentially, whether it's with Ben Simmons and then saying, but hey, we'll give you some low-cost guys, and Dorian Finney-Smith would fit that, Royce would fit that. Now, Cam Thomas or younger players would make sense from a Portland standpoint. Maybe you have to involve a third team, but the Nets also have some draft capital living inside of veteran players. And this is where Sean Marks could recover a mistake from the deadline and say, I'm going to turn 2 or 3 players into 3 or 4 first-round picks, and now I can make this move without doing the thing I think the Nets want to balance, completely dumping out all of their assets again and staring down an all-or-nothing scenario, right? So I think there's some other moves that could get made here, and you mentioned it. I think it is fair to say it's more complicated for Brooklyn than it is potentially for other teams, at which point I think it does maybe come down to, what does Dame Lillard want? Because we talked about this with Kevin Durant specifically. The Nets, quote, did right by him, getting him to Phoenix. I think Portland might want to do the same type of thing when it comes to Dame, understanding that they're going to have to retool themselves and try to be an attractive place for someone else to come and play.
Yeah, and I think like that is where like, and I guess we'll get to it in a little bit here, but this is where the part in terms of like what the Nets have to offer and like what other teams can offer. I just think that, okay, I think let's say they pulled off the thing we talked about yesterday with the DFS and Royce ONeill for like 3 more first round picks. I think then it's like starting to look like a lot more viable. Now maybe the team's way worse, and you're like, hey, we don't have any other pieces here to slot around this guy, and now why are we doing this at all? So this is always this is always the push and pull with this, right? It's like there's like such a push and pull. It's like you have to make sure you have other pieces here in place for when you get the guy, right? And you got to make sure you have enough left in the cupboard to be able to sort of fill in pieces or to be able to send out. It's hard. Like this asset sort of like carousel is tough to pull off. But I do think things would have been like moderately easier had they done other certain things. That being said, had they done those things, I don't think we'd be talking about Dame Lillard, because they wouldn't have other, you know what I mean? Like, I don't, if they had tanked the whole season and it was just Bridges and question marks after this, like, I don't think we'd be talking about Lillard in the same way. So the Nets are sitting, and maybe the list of available suitors is smaller than I think it is, right? Maybe it seems like the market for Lillard would be high, but I think there's a lot of cases against it, for sure. But I don't know. It's what always makes these situations super weird, is because you have to be kind of like just in the right situation. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense at all, or it makes all the sense in the world, but you don't have the assets to pull it off.
And so we'll come up talking in a second. Should the Nets do this or not, if it's on the table? Doug and I will debate that and take a look at how many other suitors could there really be for the $60 million man, Dame Lillard.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at GameTime. Over at GameTime, they want to make getting tickets stress-free. You're trying to go to a game, you're trying to go to a concert, an event. You want to just think about going and seeing the team you want to see or the concert you want to see. You don't want to think about all the stuff that goes into getting tickets, making sure you're getting the right ones. GameTime has solved this for you. Right now, if you go to GameTime, our friends over the New York Mets, they have a homestand here against the Nationals and then one against the Braves coming up over the weekend. You can go to the Nationals game starting at $1 over at GameTime. So there you go. And then over the Braves over the weekend, starting at $8 over at GameTime. And it's going to make it easy. You're going to see where the seats are. They're going to guarantee price lock in. So if you see the price at a better place, Game Time will match that price as well. Football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in the row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Even better than what I just said a minute ago. Get the images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what you're going to be seeing when you arrive. Buy those tickets in a matter of seconds. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
Okay, so let's just start here before we even talk about other suitors on the market, because I started thumbing through this a little bit. And the first one, actually, ironically, that came to mind was the team that talked about being the suitor for Mikal Bridges on a pass through, the Memphis Grizzlies. Hey, that's a pretty nice landing spot for a Dame Lillard, and you put him with Ja, and you think you have something there. But when you start to add up the money to make that match and the draft capital and everything else, and maybe the fact that it's a Western Conference team, like, should Portland be begrudging any suitor? Of course not. I doubt that that'll play a huge factor, but maybe they want to send him out of conference. I'll bring up another team that I actually think is disgustingly ideal for a move like this, but let's just deal with the nuts and bolts. Would you be pro making a move like this? And I'll split it into two categories. The one category is a ton of draft picks, Ben Simmons, and young players. The other category is saying that you need to give up, maybe it's a sign and trade with Cam Johnson, right? Maybe it's a Nick Claxton. Like, when you start talking about key pieces that you think would exist inside of a really good core along with Dame Lillard, do you split the difference there about a yes or a no?
I think this is kind of just a no for me. Almost no matter what. I mean, short of just like a heist, and I don't think that would be on the table for them. I think that, like, there's just too much other risk around Dame, and it's got really like nothing to do with him now. Really, although he hasn't played full seasons in the last two. Now, some of that's context. Portland
Sure.
really shut him down very quickly because they wanted to get into the tank, and he was on board. I think that they were like in the thick of it a couple of these times, he would have played more. Maybe not 2 years ago. Definitely this year. I think it was kind of clear what they were doing. Still hasn't played a full season in a couple of years. I think what worries me a little more here is that when you really look at the contract, like, there's worlds where this goes really bad. He makes 43 now. He's going to make $63 million. It's a player option. I mean, who knows what the NBA is going to look like here in 26, 27, but sure. $63 million player option for a 36-year-old Dame Lillard. It feels like he's going to say yes to that. So I don't know. It's just so much money and so far out for a small guard who's had some injuries. I just think there's a lot of worlds where it doesn't put the Nets into, almost under any circumstance, it doesn't put the Nets into championship consideration. And after that, I think there's like significantly more downside risk. So I think it's kind of a no for me, understanding that the spectrum is wide, but I think there's more points on the spectrum where I say no. Does that make sense? Like, I think that's where I probably land.
Yeah, like my no categories are things I mentioned, like Nick Claxton, not because Dame Lillard isn't a better player than Nicholas Claxton, but because Nicholas Claxton is younger and because this team wants to be competitive long term, and you want to keep your quality young players around. Can you replace players? Of course you can. The yes category for me would be what we talked about there in the last segment. Well, if you can turn Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce ONeill into first round draft capital, and maybe over the next couple of years draft capital, and send that through to Portland. So any version where by 27 and 29, you still held on to some of the Phoenix or the Dallas capital, then I think like I could squint and see it, because what you're saying is, hey, we believe like we have the runway of Mikal Bridges' current contract. So over these next few seasons, let's try to be as competitive as we can be. Do I think that adding Dame Lillard makes them better than Milwaukee or Boston or maybe Philadelphia? It depends, right? Philadelphia, that's a conversation. I think you can be competitive and beat them in that series. Point being is, it doesn't make you the odds-on favorite to come out of the East, but it does lift you into a different category in terms of playoff basketball. How much does that matter to Sean Marks, Joe Tsai, and the Brooklyn Nets versus where they are right now, which you believe with drafting, and you've done a good job in that regard, finding young talent, finding cheap talent that have been dumpstered by other teams. You could still maybe be a play-in and playoff team. There's a difference there. So in the right scenario, I like the short-term buy on Dame Lillard, because it means in a couple of years, maybe you're out from underneath him and you're still on a pretty nice even trajectory with Mikal Bridges or Cam Johnson going forward, right? So there's worlds to it. I do wonder about what you mentioned, like if other teams get involved and what that looks like. And I'll specifically throw one out here when we talk about other suitors. If the Miami Heat, who have almost no draft capital, but came to the table with Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, and 5 first-round picks, leaving them with next to nothing, that gets it done. Now, they need to do more. Does more need to be involved? Sure. Is that the best offer that Portland will get? Maybe not. But that's a team that if you're Dame Lillard, you look at differently than maybe you look at the Brooklyn Nets, right? I think that that's a massive factor here if we believe that his, desires will be taken into account by Portland to some extent. Miami, teams that have been there, that have the veteran talent, that have also achieved the goal of going to the NBA Finals, I think Dame would squint and look at those rosters and think, hey, this lines up with my short-term agenda here as well.
Yeah, that's the one I did too. That seemed like the quick, obvious place. They need more scoring out of the guard position. Like they could really use an on-ball guy. They said they can send back Hero, who's at least young, and whatever. They have some Stepien issues with their draft picks, but if they did it on draft night, that's a little different because they can send their pick from this year. There's other ways that they can make it work. I think a team like that makes a lot more sense around Jimmy and Bam. That team is close to championship kind of contender-ish if those guys can stay healthy and you kind of slot in a few more pieces along the margins. That just makes a lot more sense to mortgage the future for the now, because you already have sort of 2 guys in place, right? They have 2 guys in Butler and Bam who have championship pedigree. So, or ish. I mean, I know, Bam's never been there, but whatever. Oh no. Sorry. It was 2 years ago. Yeah. Or 3 years ago against the Lakers. So it's way easier to tell yourself that story. I think the story for the Nets is too long and winding to really tell the Dame story for. I'm not saying any superstar wouldn't qualify. I'm just saying this particular guy, for as great as I think Dame is, I just can't get there as quickly on it. So I think it was smart by Marks to keep the options open, and not just poo-poo anything right out of the gate. But I just don't think when push comes to shove, I think there's a lot more teams that should be significantly more motivated than Brooklyn could ever be. And just like I said, even just sending Tyler Hero, it's a difference of whatever you think of Tyler Hero. Some people love him. Some people think he's overrated, whatever. He overpaid probably a little bit. At least he plays at a high level. When you're just comparing his contract to Simmons, right? Let's say just a Tyler Hero going back in a trade is such a different thing than sending Ben Simmons back in a trade when you're talking about money. And so even these other things that line up, I think it's just going to line up better for some of these other teams. Anyway, I think I land on the no side.
Yeah, I want to reiterate one point before we get out of here. I will say I did also just do the 3-team deal where Dame ends up on the Mavericks and Kyrie in a sign and trade goes to Miami. I can do these things in real time, Doug. I can get there. And by the way, not for nothing, just bring up the Mavericks as a standalone component of they need to make a move like this. They need to do something sizable here. And I've heard Nick Angstadt of Locked On Mavs, they've been talking about this, the sign and trade option for Kyrie, trying to move the needle here. So there will be teams that are involved. So that's a fun one. I just, that I can get lost in that. Specifically, just back on the Nets here, my final thought is just that I can get excited about Dame Lillard. I love him as a player. And I'm the yes or no, that's here nor there. I'm comfortable with this team going forward and continuing to build. At some point, you have to accept that dream that you had didn't work out, and it's okay to take a season or 2 to get yourself back into even footing. And it would seem like a pretty big pendulum swing over a season, essentially, for the Nets to go from a superstar era out of one, back into one. It's a lot. And I think you could find yourself 2 years from now having the same conversation. Well, they blew it, and now they gave up all the capital for Dame. And even if it was a good couple of years, it wasn't enough. You didn't make the finals. You didn't make the Eastern Conference Finals. And now you're talking about Mikal and Cam, and they're getting old and all that stuff, right? So for my own sanity, I'd prefer the iteration where there's a core here, we like them, and we can squint and think about what they can do with draft capital to improve this team and cement themselves as a top 6, maybe top 5 seed over the next few seasons.
And while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to put something together that gets us Dame and Anthony Simons, and we just got to send out Joe Harris and Ben Simmons. And these are the ones that always come across our desktops from other people. They're and we'll just throw in Cam Thomas and and a second rounder. And who says no? It's yeah, these are what I'm most looking forward to is the 1 million iterations of the thing that Portland would never say yes to. Those are always my favorite.
All the terrible. You want all the terrible stuff? Let's get hey, you know what though? As you would say, Doug, let's get all the terrible ideas out of the way first. Great. And then we can move on to the realistic options that we could go
You
after.
take all the guys I hate, and we take your best player. All right. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Really seen the numbers continue to climb. I mean, even the playoffs ending here, everyone's kind of still coming in here on YouTube. Really, really appreciative of that. Make sure you are subscribed over on YouTube to Locked On Nets.
There are only two options regarding commitment. You're either in or you're out. Patrick Riley.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. Go get Damian Lillard. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.